Welcome to another edition of Rider Nation Station, presented by American Manufacturing Solutions, your total logistics partner, investing in Rider Nation Station and St. Mary's, Ohio, as well as Plus One Professionals Real Estate, your local real estate agency, and to our other fine sponsors. When I get to interview St. Mary's for Rider Nation Station, I consider myself one of the luckiest individuals in town. I get to help bring history alive and have conversations with some amazing folks. Today, I get to interview one of my role models. I've had some great role models in my life, especially within my own family, and it is an arduous task to follow their example. And not follow their example because I feel I have to, but to follow their example because I want to. Today's guest has been a role model of mine since I was a very young boy attending church at St. Paul's United Church of Christ and basketball games at McBroom Gymnasium. He's an athlete. He's getting inducted into the inaugural Boys Basketball Hall of Fame class. He is a minister. He is a professor at Miami University. He is an author. He is a loving husband and father, and he is definitely one of the nicest human beings I have ever met. Without further ado, Dr. Thomas Poetter, welcome to Rider Nation Station.
Thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, Tom, we're going to talk about your time, mostly here at St. Mary's, but we'll talk about some other things. But the first thing I'm going to bring up is Miranda Lambert's country song, The House That Built Me. I'm not certain if you're familiar with it or not, but it's a song that has deep personal connection with me. So I want you to tell us about the house that built you, the church parsonage.
Oh, that's a great question. I was thinking about that today when I was driving around town before the interview, and that 429 West High.
Still there.
Great address. I just drove past it. Beautiful brick structure. It had several really interesting aspects to it. One was it had, before 1972, it had a huge backyard basketball area.
Okay.
With a freestanding pool, and my brother and kids in the neighborhood loved that. But we needed cover for the cars, and we needed a new family room. We just didn't have enough room in the house with 4 kids and 2 parents. And we took a vacation, and the family didn't know there was going to be a remodel. And
because there was probably going to be major objections.
There were major objections. They lasted many years afterward. They covered the basketball area over with a carport. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that.
Carport there, which they subsequently sort of framed in, so it was complete like a garage.
Okay.
But we had a carport and a new family room, and that changed the house a lot and made it much more livable. We had a family room where we could watch TV together. And we had a place to put the car in the cover. And you know, Dad, he drove all over the Lima Land region, visiting people and going to meetings, etc. And you know, the car was out in snow and ice constantly, so
he deserved a garage.
Everybody thought it was a much better idea. And I had a real, I think even today, I was glad to have my own bedroom. We all had our own bedroom upstairs, but it was really small. It might have been, I don't know, 6 by 9. Maybe.
Wow.
It was a really small library with a twin bed, shelves on one end, and a closet. But it was a really cozy, great place to grow up, have my things in it myself. We had lots of fun in the basement, which was unfinished. But my brother, when he was in high school, Carl and his friends built a sort of mini bar in the basement with bricks and mortar. And he had kind of his own place down there next to the laundry area. And that was a really fun place to play. And sometimes it was pretty dungeony down there. But it was a really cool place to grow up. That house was a great house. And the church took really good care of it. But you know, the economy of ministry changed a lot. And with pastors not building any equity during their careers, it really hurt them. So that changed. But it's a great place to grow up. And we were across the street, as you know, from the Folk Funeral Home.
Right.
And that funeral home had beautiful, high box hedges around the driveway to provide privacy for families, and they kept that up beautifully. It was a really beautiful corner of town.
You're right, that was a beautiful area all the way around there. So Miranda Lambert writes, if I could just come in, I swear I'll leave Won't take nothing but a memory from the house that built me. What would you want to go back and look at if you were able to, just one last time?
Oh. Well, I always, when I drive by, I always look to see if the yard is mud or grass. And the neighbors would complain that the Poetter boys had muddied the entire yard with baseball games and every other mode of game that we played, especially me later. And my dad always said yards are for boys, not for parishioners, which was a great way of telling the church it's okay that it's muddy.
Right.
The kids are outside and they're living their lives. And you know, that whole neighborhood, I think some neighborhoods probably in town are similar to this today, maybe not that neighborhood in particular, but we got to run the neighborhood as kids in the 60s and 70s. And we knew everybody's house, and we were always surveilled. Right. As you know, like you couldn't get away with anything in that neighborhood. Everybody was watching all the time. But we could ride our bikes freely, we could play in the yards, and that's a really fond memory for me. If I could take one thing, it's that commitment by my dad to make sure that we could play outside and not be in jeopardy of people saying that we were playing too hard or too rough, because we did. And we grew up that way, and it was a really good way to grow up, I think.
Outstanding. So you mentioned your father. He was the pastor at St. Paul's United Church of Christ. As a matter of fact, he baptized me.
Right.
The day your dad unexpectedly passed away changed your life forever. Tell us about who Howard Poetter was, and then how you were able to adapt with life after his passing.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that my dad was a pastor of a large church in a small town during some really important years, 61 to 76. So 75 was the 30th anniversary of his ordination. So he was in the ministry 30 years, had a great long career, but the longest tenure was at St. Paul's. And a lot of pastors sort of have, like the Methodists move, they're itinerant. But the United Church of Christ, major prominent Protestant denomination, has a different policy. Pastors move at their will. And, you know, pastors should probably move every 8 to 12 years. And we probably should have moved, you know. But Dad loved it here, and so did we. And he was committed in part to the region because Ohio had, in that time period, the best school system for developmentally disabled citizens. And so my sister Annie, who was born with Downs, was really well served by the Auglaize school system. Auglaize School for Citizens is still a great memory of ours, and the way she was able to grow up and become in the church and in the school and in the community was a real gift. My dad was very committed to that. And I think that his relationship with Annie, his relationship with young people, and especially kids growing up playing basketball. Dad was a three-sport star at Heidelberg: baseball, football, basketball.
Okay.
And he ran and founded, I think, the church league basketball program in the late 60s and early 70s, which a lot of young people played in, and volleyball and all kinds of sports happened because pastors in the region got together and made out these opportunities available. I think that was a time of tremendous social upheaval, and he was, I think, careful but also clear about what he thought social justice looked like and how the church could play a part in it. And I think that was really an interesting part of his career. And I think that his passing was a great blow to us. And not overwhelmingly unexpected, because he had a heart attack in '74 that almost claimed him, and he rehabbed and was doing well when he died. But you know, it was right in that period where heart procedures were becoming more routine, but not. So probably like maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years later, he probably routinely would have had bypass and stopped smoking, which a lot of ministers did in that era and still do probably. And probably lived a long, healthy life into his 80s. So there's some regret about that. Like the timing of it was not great. And of course the timing wasn't great for our family, because Carl was just going to college, Annie was still at Auglaize School, and Vivian and I were still basically in grade school. And my mom made a really tough decision to stay in St. Mary's. The church was good to us. That was a key factor.
Yeah.
And we were doing well in school, and Annie was settled. Carl was already at Heidelberg. But the key thing probably was that Larry Sabeck, the high school baseball coach, called me up to the varsity as a freshman. That was the year after Dad passed. So I started high school, and Mom was starting a new job at Lima Memorial Hospital, and we were really very close to moving to Lima. It was just a week or two.
Yeah.
Like, Mom was really close to making that decision. And I played on that 1978 WBL championship team with some great star players. And I suffered some because I took some boys' place.
Sure.
And I know your brother Sean did that too when he was a freshman.
Mm-hmm.
And Coach Sabeck did that. He brought freshmen up to play. And especially if they could hold their own, they stayed in the lineup. And I think that sealed it. We wound up staying in St. Mary's. That was a real blessing to us, I think. At least for me. I can speak for myself. I can't speak for my siblings. But growing up here and making it all the way through high school was a gift probably that my mom and dad gave us, and particularly my dad, settling here and staying here those years. Does that answer your question?
That definitely does, Tom, and obviously a blessing to St. Mary's for you to stay here, especially that 81 team, right?
Yeah, that was a really great run. And all the other things I got to do in basketball
Mm-hmm.
too, even prior to that, St. Mary's are great. I hope to talk more about that with Mike.
Definitely so. And so your father passes away. You mentioned that he had been ordained for 30 years at 75, and you graduate, go to Heidelberg, and you go into ministry, or you go the path to become a minister.
Right.
Talk to us about that decision of being called to take that path and where it has led you.
I really didn't know what I wanted to do with the call I had. I always thought I would teach and coach, and because I saw my dad doing that to some
Mm-hmm.
degree, and he did it through the ministry, and I was very interested in the Christian ministry. I went to Princeton Theological Seminary and studied for it. In the second year there, it's a 3-year program, and MDiv is 3 years, a professional degree. I didn't quit in my second year, even though in my second year I got a position coaching high school basketball at Princeton High School in Princeton, New Jersey.
Oh.
That really sealed it for me.
Yeah.
And then Princeton had a backdoor program through the university. It was the first in the nation. New Jersey had the first master's degree to teaching program in the country. And I was one of the first people that was able to execute that by working with Princeton University, student teaching, and getting a lifetime teaching certificate in New Jersey. And when I went down that path, I felt like executing my call was going to wind up being working with young people in school. And I got my first job at Culver Academies in Indiana in 1988, and I looked really good on paper, and they found out I was pretty good in person. I hope they still feel that way, but I was an ordained minister. I would be an ordained minister. I had a master's degree. I had an English certificate to teach. And I had my beautiful wife, Chris, who was a professional person too. So they got a 2-for-1 package when we went
Sure.
to live there at Culver. And they ordained me, the United Church of Christ of Northwest Ohio ordained me to work with students there as associate chaplain. So I did that for 3 years at Culver, and really learned a lot about the ministry, working with students on an academic level, intellectual level in the classroom, coaching them in basketball. I didn't coach baseball at that time, but I coached basketball at Culver, and then working with them on the weekends, but mainly on the weekends with chapel and mission trips.
And your ordination service was at St. Paul's, correct?
It was held here. So
I thought I remembered being there.
I've
and
been there.
The church being very full of pride for one of their own becoming a man of the cloth.
they would call it at that time, and still probably son of the church.
Yes.
But your parents too were very important in our lives growing up. Always tremendous church members who attended always and brought their kids, right?
Mhm.
That's what you did. And so I got to know you that way through
Right.
church. And I didn't mention this earlier, but that was a really important sort of fabric of our life, where all of the people that we met through church, who even Dad passed, stayed
Sure.
invested in us. And that's not easy to do. And people really went out of their way to do that. And that was also a blessing to us and a gift.
Instead of serving the church, as you mentioned, you eventually, and I should take that back, you still were serving God in the way that you were dealing with young people, but it was a little bit of a divergent path than just going to the pulpit, I should say.
Yes, and yeah, go ahead.
And it eventually takes you to higher learning.
It did. I was at Culver, and my mom had always seen me. She thought, I had enough tools to be an academic, and she always encouraged me to keep going to school, just like my brother and sister did, and Annie always went to school, right? Education was really important to the family. I had 2 parents with college degrees. That was not very common in the 1960s and 70s.
Exactly, and if I recall, your mom was an occupational therapist.
She was, and she kept her
license
good for 30 years while she served as a pastor's wife.
Which served as a true blessing at the passing of your dad.
Yeah, she was ready to work in her field, and she was lucky enough to get a position to do that. But so we got really fortunate with that too.
And so the calling is to higher education. You're the department chair of educational leadership now?
Yeah. Yes.
Outstanding. And
it sounds a little more glamorous maybe than it is.
So how did that all evolve at Miami? And what do you teach, and what is it being the chair?
At Culver, I felt like my mom and my wife were very, very clear to me that like if I wanted to go ahead and pursue a career in higher ed, I should do it. I shouldn't wait, especially after I had 3 years in teaching at Culver. And I felt ready. I took some early classes at Indiana University in the summer of 1990, and that really whet my appetite for that. And so I studied curriculum and instruction and got a PhD from Indiana in 1994.
Okay.
So I then began looking for work in higher ed, and the avenue for a person with my degree was teacher education, which I was really interested in and still am. I'm still working in that area. And so my first job at Trinity University in San Antonio was a teacher education position. I worked with students who were going to be licensed to teach high school in Texas in an urban school district partnership. Students doing a Master's of Arts in Teaching for a year after they graduated from Trinity. It was a really great entry into my field. It really set up me being ready for the job in Miami, which I knew I wasn't going to get. It was a really competitive position. They actually wound up having such a good pool, they hired 2 people. That used to happen when universities had money. And I was able to go to Miami in 1997 and start this trajectory toward where I am today, which is chairing an academic department. And my field of study is curriculum studies. So I have 1 foot in ed leadership and 1 foot in teacher ed, almost all of the time.
Okay. Have you had any Rough Riders that you've taught?
Yes, I have. And over the years, that's been really fun to reminisce. And right now, working in my office is Jacqueline Lunds. So one of my classmates, John Lunds, his daughter is at Miami, she's a junior. And she works as a student assistant in our office.
Yes.
So we're connected that way, and it's really always fun to hear about the connections back to St. Mary's. And quite honestly, I mean, people move away, right? And Springsteen has that great song, "This Is Your Hometown."
Yep.
And I've always felt like that St. Mary's was my hometown. I've always felt that way. And while I didn't have people here, my wife Chris had people here.
Right.
Cooks are still here, and so Neil and Joyce and the rest of the family, the extended family, Chris's side, pulled us back here always, and that's always been a good thing. Not only that with family, but friends in town. So St. Mary's, my hometown.
So not only do you teach, but you write.
I do.
You're a distinguished and published author with, let's just look at books. I know you've got many publications out there, but how many books are you part of or solely responsible for?
Solely or part of 22 so far. So I think I'll retire in 2028 probably. I hope to have 30 books. And I got started writing books in 2010, seriously. I'd written several books before that because they came out of projects I was working on, and they looked like they had more meat to them than an article, like there was more there.
Yeah.
So I got some book contracts with education publishers to write a book. So I did that, enjoyed it. And then I started working with doctoral students who were also fledgling scholars and writers, and I started turning class projects and other projects into book-length works. That turned out to be a really good double-edged educational tool. So I was able to get the word out about important things in education that I thought the public should be consuming, and I also gave students a chance to enter into the publishing world with some shelter. You know, they could work with me, I could edit their work, I could get it ready for publication, and they would have a publication on their CV. So all of that's been happening. I've been doing my own independent work and publishing with students really, really a lot since 2010.
So combined, you and I have 22 books published.
That's correct.
I have none.
Although you can always write a book.
So how long of a process is it to have an idea and have it on the shelves or via Amazon?
That's a really good question. It's, I would say any good project of any length probably takes at least 18 months to, at least. And so some of them take longer, years and years. I had a project I worked on called The Education of Sam Sanders, which was a novella-length treatment of my take on the impact of the education standardization movement, especially the testing movement in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I started writing that work in about 2000. It was a critique of the current status quo of teaching curriculum and the politics around curriculum. And I kept vetting that piece with my own students, and the students kept asking me to add to it. It became a book-length work by 2006. So that project took about 5 or 6 years to complete. And academics do that. Sometimes they work on projects for a long time, getting it to a place where it can be consumed. And you know, academics aren't like Stephen King and any of the great authors of the day who write novels, etc. Nobody buys our books or reads them, except for sometimes students and other academics who are working on ideas in the field, either theoretically or conceptually or practically for their work. So that kind of work has a contribution to make to the professional movement and work in society, but no one gets a lake house out of it, typically.
Yeah, I remember I had an interpersonal communication class at Bowling Green,
Yeah.
and the professor was Richard Weaver, and then you went and bought the book. It was written by Richard Weaver. Like, oh dear, this is going to be trouble. Do you have that where?
I have a book that I use in class. It's called Teacher Leadership for the 21st Century. It's a book I started writing because the class I was teaching on teacher leadership, I was actually hired to Miami to revise. They were so unhappy with the class and what it had become. They wanted a class on teacher leadership which focused on functions of teachers in the workplace that were leadership oriented, not just about a course on topics like labor law and finance that students of teaching sometimes study. They wanted a better treatment of that. Well, when I was putting the class together, I really couldn't find the right type of book-length resource that I wanted. I used books along the way. It took me about 5 years to craft the textbook that's used in that class now. That was almost 20 years ago. And what I did with that project was I asked the students to let me use their best writing in the book to showcase the important ideas in it. So over the years, at least 40 or 50 students have contributed to that book. So that book that's shared with students and used by students is also written by students. That's one of the ways I've worked with that problem. Like, it's a problem, the economy problem of having people consume your own work and pay for it in your class. There's intellectual property ideas about that that are sound and ethical. But I think that's one of those things. And scholars do that.
Yeah.
They do share their own work with students.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a couple of books after we come back from our break. But one last question before that. You've worked extremely hard, many dedicated years of time and effort into your profession. And as a result, you've received recognition and accolades. If you could name just one of the greatest recognition or accolade that you've received to date, what would that be?
That's a great question. I mean, you don't want to say it's hard to pick one out of
Now you
so
wish I
many.
had shown you the questions beforehand, don't you?
There aren't so many. I mean, people in my line of work don't typically always win awards. Most of the work of academics and professors happens with students, and that's the economy of higher education. But sometimes you get recognized, and I won an award for vision in mentoring doctoral students in our college in 2017. And I was surprised by that people were seeing me, and I really appreciated being seen by my peers and the dean. And so that's probably the one that I appreciate the most. Although I will say this, that I won an award for teaching at Culver in my second year. It's called the General Del Marti Spivey Award for Excellence in Teaching. It's a junior faculty award. And so I was competing with all the junior faculty there. Not everybody won it. So I won it my second year, and one of my mentors at Culver said, run now. Because you're stuck. Once you start winning awards, you can never leave, right? So I heard him, and I think he's probably one of the people that probably encouraged me on. And it wouldn't have been a bad life to stay at Culver or to be in high school teaching and coaching. And a lot of our friends have done that, and they've had wonderful, complete lives. But I just had this itch to study, and I had people in my ear to do it, and I'm glad I did it.
Alrighty, so that's the first half of our interview with Dr. Thomas Poetter. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back to bring you the last half.
Here at TLC, we expanded our business, so we wanted the security of knowing exactly where all the kids are and what's going on in each of the rooms. We chose Fowler's because we've done all our televisions with them, and they mentioned they have security systems. So we just wanted to go out and look at it, and they were very upfront, and they do excellent work from start to finish. And so we chose Fowler's TV. It's been great for us here at TLC Learning Center, and Fowler's TV would be great for anyone.
All right, back here with Dr. Thomas Poetter, affectionately known as Tommy from me.
Yes, and my mom didn't like that at all. She told Dave Helmstetter to stop writing my name Tommy in the paper when I was in high school.
But it's hard to stop.
It's hard to stop, and friends still call me Tommy, but most of my friends call me Putt. And that came from the Burke boys, who thought my little legs, tromping around the neighborhood, playing all the games we played together, reminded them of little putt-putt cars. Remember the putt-putt cars, the little wooden cars?
Yep.
So I got that nickname right off. I was probably 6.
So that's a credit to Joe and Dan
Joe
Burke.
and Dan, my good friends from our neighborhood, whose dad, with great foresight, put a beautiful metal net goal in their huge driveway. Now it's an office.
The metal net goal.
It was something. It was really a great place to play basketball.
What's next for you professionally and personally?
That's also a good question. I have 2 answers to the professional part. One is I think I have the tools for leadership in another position up the chain, like in higher ed and in my field of education. You know, I'm chair of a department now. I have 17 faculty who work with me, and hundreds of students who are in our department taking degrees. That's important mid-level management type work, and I'm happy to do it for a certain term. But the next step would be dean or associate dean, and of a college, like a college of education or allied
Sure.
profession type college. And then higher work probably as provost or president. And my mom always thought I was going to be a college president at 40. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. I'm not John Dewey or somebody,
Yeah.
or anybody. I'm not that. And those types of people are rare, but I think I could do that if I wanted to. I also have thought about finishing this term in 2023 and going back to the faculty full time, and probably doing what I'm best at, which is working with students, shepherding their intellectual work and practical work in the field, and helping them learn how to make their own mark in the public with writing or teaching. So I don't know. I have set a goal with my sons, though, is that one of them, I'm hoping, will take me to the 2028 Olympic Games in LA. I hope to still be ambulatory.
Yes.
And this is a weird thing about me, but I always have had an interest in the javelin throw. Like, not like I could ever do it, but just the whole mechanics of it and the beauty of it, actually. And so I want to see the javelin throw in LA Coliseum in 2028. So if anybody
awesome.
watches this and sets their calendar ahead, look for me in the stands.
I can't even plan for tomorrow. Like, you've got what you
Well,
want to do in 2028 personally. That's awesome.
The intervening part, like the personal part, is to be well enough to be around for my boys and to enjoy old age. She would never claim it, but Chris would never claim old age. She'll live to be 100 anyway. But to live into, she has it in the genes.
Yep.
I don't. So to make it to an age where we can grow old and enjoy life together, even post-retirement, that would be a really great thing. So I aspire to that.
Yes. Yes. I always say that the mission of Rider Nation Station is to capture stories for today, but really more importantly is for 50 years down the road. So if somehow St. Marian's can find YouTube and find us, that they can get this little glimpse of what St. Mary's, Ohio was like when we shot it, and even before, because that's what we're doing with you, is telling your story back in the 60s and the 70s. What do you want future St. Marian's 2071 to remember about Dr. Thomas Poetter?
Well, I'm glad you didn't give me that question. You shouldn't think about that one too long. I'd like them to think that someone that grew up here could very well have stayed and been happy, and that the city, the town, and the people here birthed them, like really gave them life, not just the family and the home, but the extended community. And the 18 years I was here living, actually to 22 before my mom moved away to Springfield for her second marriage, really lived in town until I was 22. It would have been the early mid-80s. I loved it here and still do. I love coming home. You ever have that feeling, this has been written about some, there's some science around it, like it's almost like a homing pigeon. Like when you feel like when you're on the road, when you're on 66 coming north, you just feel like you're coming home. I feel that way when I'm coming back to St. Mary's. And I think that says something for the town, not just the location, but the people and the way I felt when I was here. And I got to do things in high school that I got to do probably because I grew up in a small town and could make the teams. You know, I got to play and I got to thrive. And my mom used to say, if I was disappointed, she used to say, you know, you got to dribble up and down the court at the room while people cheered. And probably my best memory was playing on winning teams in the Broom Gym. And when that ball came off Damon Goodwin's hands to mine into the basket, and I was running down the floor faster than everybody else, and people were standing as fast as they could to watch what would happen at the other end. People don't always get that, and I got that, and I'll never forget it. So I got to grow up in an era where sports were important, and a lot of kids got to play. And a lot of kids did play, even if they didn't play on the team, and cared about the sports that were being played by their friends, and they came to the games. Got to grow up in that atmosphere and really basically run the whole town. Like I could go anywhere in town for a pickup game or to see friends, and because we didn't have anything to do in the house. There were no
Not in a 6x9 room.
exactly. There was nothing to do there, and mother would not have it. Like, we were always flushed out of the home, and for good reason, because that was how we were educated. We got to play. So I'd like people to remember that. Like, if they want to have a great town, is to keep the schools going. Like, I'm in education, I have been my whole professional career, especially public schools. Keep them going, and keep kids active and supported and aware of their surroundings, and keep track of them and care for them. And your children are not just the children in your own house, but everybody else. And it wasn't like people telling on you, right? They were caring for you. Like, I saw Tommy crossing the street wrong with his bike. And that happened. And Mom's like, took him bike for a week. She's like, you can't cross the street that way. I'm like, I can't believe that so-and-so ratted me out. She's like, that's not what it is. Yeah. So all of that, I'd say.
And you probably learned your lesson as well.
A
week without your bike, that's a big deal right there.
I learned quite a few lessons in St. Mary's. Mostly, not from successes. Yeah. Like from failures. Like the basketball team, when I started my sophomore year, we were 1-37. And that was a rough patch to write your basketball history, but we learned a lot from that. Like, one of the things you have to learn is that you have to practice that sport. And you can't just be athletic to play basketball. You have to practice that sport. And I learned that at home, and I got to learn it with a lot of people who cared about me and gave me opportunities. That's something that I hope that people in education and people in small towns like this, where children are growing up and thriving and will become something very special, citizens of some sort, is that they have to have opportunities to get it right and to fail.
Okay. Well, thank you, and we'll see in 2071 what people do think of Dr. Thomas Poetter.
I'd love to be here for that.
One of your published books is Curriculum Windows: What Curriculum Theorists of the 1990s Can Teach Us About Schools and Society Today.
Right.
And this is just one of the decades that you wrote about.
Correct.
Has curriculum theory changed much from the 1950s to where we are today?
Yes, a lot.
More,
you want to know how?
More contrast than similarities?
More contrast, I would say. I'd say by the late 1950s and early 1960s, we were really worried about whether or not students could compete with the Russians. Mm-hmm. And that sort of broad metaphor, it really doesn't quite make sense to us today, but it gets manifest in other ways. So the similarity is that we're still trying to hold public schools accountable for things they probably can't do. Like, they can't make every child rise to the level of a super student that can go on and do things like build rockets. Those are important to us, right? For a lot of different reasons. But curriculum theory has changed in terms of like how people think about the educational process and how they think about school, not only pragmatically on the acute level, like in classrooms, but also in society. So one of the things I help students, I think, understand, especially if they're teachers, that the curriculum is more than just what's in the books or in the classroom. The curriculum is the entire context of educational experience in children's lives. Students don't come to the classroom like a blank slate. They come with a whole life of context. Mm-hmm. And when we don't tap into it, and we don't even honor or even recognize it, we're really missing a lot of the boat, what's possible with children. So I'm trying to get the students, at least at Miami, that come through one of my classes or read one of my books to think about that idea, which is really different than 1950 and 1960. That you probably would call it somewhat progressive, like to be thinking about children and their lives as curriculum. But I think that's more important even today, especially in the I hope in some ways, post-testing era.
Was there a decade that was better, in your opinion, with curriculum theory? Or has it just been...
A lot of people think that the 70s are a washout, but the 70s is our decade, Doug, right? Or 70s was probably...
I got a little bit of it in
really
grade school at Bolton Elementary.
Really important era for my field, because the sort of, this is going to be too academic, but sort of the positivist view of the world, that everything can be codified and there's a truth behind it. that idea that it's set in stone and that you can measure, for instance, student achievement, or you can measure the attainment of knowledge somehow in a unique and accurate way, really was disproved by science itself, that that's really not possible. And inquiry in my field really changed in the 1970s. It became more open, became more multidisciplinary, it became more possible for people to think outside the box of pre-test, post-test. Like that's the only way to show any type of intervention working cause and effect. There's more to it than that. And education itself is a much more complicated endeavor than just that. You went to school there.
I did. Another.
You want to come back to college?
I have every day since I graduated.
It's a great place to be.
I would love to.
And it keeps you young.
So, I want to switch gears on books to the one that you wrote in 2014,
Yeah.
50 Christmases.
Thanks for showing that. That's a plug.
That is a plug. For those of you who have not read it yet, and I'm telling you, read it. The first 20 plus chapters are centered directly or indirectly to St. Mary's, Ohio. It's such a great read, a real dive into St. Mary's nostalgia, and an absolute tremendous idea. How did this vision evolve, and how did you put together the early years for 50 Christmases?
Sort of pre-advanced cognition, like 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, because Piaget's not going to say you could do this.
That's correct. I tell the reader early on that I use a method of piecing together family stories and pictures to sort of tell the story of what happened. And one of the ways I did that is through film. So my mom and dad took some Brownie Kodak film, and we have some early holiday film of the family. And one of the chapters is called Rocking Horse Winter. And I don't really remember it, but I don't remember getting that rocking horse and riding it like I did, but I rode it. And I'm on film riding it constantly. And that chapter is really about how, before I was cognizant of my own memories, how I was in memory with my family. They were taking down things that were important to them, for instance, in picture and film and story. My mom also wrote notes her whole life about family life. And I pieced those together to tell stories about the early Christmases. And they come off pretty good, I think.
Yeah, they really do.
I tried to sort of give a flavor of what early Decembers were like in my life, they were tremendous. I mean, growing up in the church, with all of that, the pageantry and love and gift giving and all of that was really powerful. And then those 22 years in St. Mary's, all of those chapters are different because there were so many different influences in my life that I wanted to highlight. And I wrote the book because I was coming up on, I think probably the 40th or 35th anniversary of my dad's passing in 76. And I just felt like I was probably in that sort of existential zone where I was feeling like I'm getting to his age. I'm like, I better start writing some of this down or else I'll be gone too. And so sort of that was sort of an internal labor of love for myself to tell the story that I have to tell so people could read it and perhaps if they cared about it, treasure it, or if not, reject it. And so I did that. It took me about 2 years to write it. And I enjoyed doing it, and I learned a lot doing it. And I thought it was an example of the kind of, I would call it autobiographical curriculum, where I'm trying to write my own journey, my educational journey and my life journey in a way that shows value and hopefully goodness in the world, which I believe in, actually.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, we've come to our last question, and I kind of ping pong back and forth whether or not to ask it, and I'm going to ask it.
What is it?
So 1 Samuel 17 tells the story of David and Goliath.
Yeah.
where the unimaginable happened. The giant was killed by a young lad who was able to take advantage of striking Goliath where he was vulnerable.
Right.
And you have no idea where this is going.
I have some ideas.
This
but-
isn't really how David and Goliath turned out, but from that biblical story, tell us about you being courageous enough to enter the political fray and take on the giant,
There's no. That's not.
and then the
it.
book Losing to Boehner,
Yeah.
Winning America.
Did you read it?
I have not.
You,
But I'm taking the cliff notes right now.
You need to read it because it's not about political position, or it's not really. There's some political ideas in it,
Mhm.
but it's really about having the courage to run when you can't.
That's huge courage.
You have, and that's one of the things that's wrong with the political system we have right now in districts that are unwinnable. So if you have two-party system and you have the second party that's not competitive, that word gets thrown around a lot in political circles. It's not competitive. So what's the reason to run? And the reason to run is so you don't feel like citizens felt in 2013, like I felt, when the seat holder really didn't represent the district, in my opinion. And some of the things that were happening in our district that were big were happening on the national stage. And no one was going to run. And no one ran in 12. And that's no way to have a democratic republic where you have seats that are uncontested. Everybody should have an election they can vote in and vote for somebody, even if their party is disadvantaged, like they can't win. So I decided to run. And it was ill-advised. I mean, nobody should do that, really, without more preparation and more backing. But I did it, and I don't regret any of it. I wish I could have gotten more votes, but I felt like I ran a service campaign that was at least ethical and reputable. And I got close to St. Mary's once or twice. I got to Salina a couple times to talk to constituents in Mercer County. That was really wonderful. I got treated really well, and sort of what I would call my home turf, and appreciated that. I didn't get any votes, but I really got treated well.
Yep.
So what's your question?
What was it like? You've answered it. What was it like running?
Yeah.
Knowing that you're really probably not going to be able to expose his vulnerabilities and
Right.
when, because of the way that it was set up. And
Yeah, we have to have races that people run in, every race. In fact, I think there should be a candidate in every race. And there should be a way to federally fund those, if possible. And I don't think that's possible. At the end of the book, I give some ideas about how to do that, but they're really untenable. They would require for our polity to take a really big step toward thinking that elections were really important, win or lose. Go ahead.
would you ever do it again?
No. I almost lost everything because of it. Like, my wife and I are still married, but that was a jeopardy. Like, that's a really hard road. When you watch politicians and you think about their lives, and I always sort of had a sense of that, like, that must be really hard to be on the plane 6, 8, 10, 12 days in a row. It is. And to give all those talks. And I saw tired politicians on the stump. It's brutal, like being out there really working it, talking to people, working the doors, working the phones. It's 24/7. And I did it with a full-time job. I couldn't leave my job, and the president of Miami gave me the permission to do it. I had to get permission from the state to run. And I'm glad he did, but also some days not.
Yeah.
Because there's some loss that happens. And if you read the book, and we can talk about this sometime in the near future when you do, we'll do it over breakfast sometime.
Okay.
There's some things to talk about that are really, really serious matters in politics that we all across the aisle and across the political spectrum should be paying attention to together as brothers and sisters.
Well, I dare to ask it, and I'm glad that I did.
I can't wait for our next meeting for
Yeah.
that. We'll have a good talk about it. And laugh, because some of it's really funny.
Okay.
When you fall on your face that many times in a row, it's got to be funny.
Well, we'll read it and get the Jays involved with it as well, and have some good fun conversations. Well, that concludes our interview portion. We're just about done, but I'm not going to let you get out of this without doing the Writer Nation Station word association game. So I'm going to give you a word, or I'm going to give you some place, event, name, context of St. Mary's, Ohio, and you immediately have to come up with the first word that you associate with.
One word, no story.
You'll follow up with a story.
Okay.
The high school baseball field.
Unique. You mean the one at Memorial High School?
Yep.
I played on it one season. I played it on as a kid all the time, but one season as a varsity player. Very unique, especially the center field pole that Doug Wine masterfully maneuvered around as a senior center fielder.
No fence.
No fence.
Light poles to contend with. Could you hit it to the Vo Science building? Could a ball
Yeah.
travel that far?
Yeah, and boys hit balls on the roof of that as home runs. And I think I may have seen one of the Wright boys do it, either Dave or Tony. Tony had a good bat too. Dave was in my brother's class and Tony between me and him, but they both hit balls really far.
So unique. You won.
Unique.
You get a point. Ben's Bicycle Shop.
Heaven. You read the chapter?
Yep.
Some people viewing may remember Ben's Bicycle Shop, but to kids under 12, it was just, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't big, but it was full of bikes and the newest model bikes. And I got one year.
A great Christmas.
It was. It still is. Every time I think of it, I smile.
And how we wish we still had it. Our old
Absolutely.
bikes.
And Ben's Bicycle Shop.
Yep.
I'd stop in it when I was in town every time if it was still there.
Hans and Fritz.
Hans and Fritz, I love that. This is totally inappropriate for me to be laughing, but Hans and Fritz was the precursor to Wendy's, like the whole idea of it. And it was, I'm pretty sure it was in front of the high school, the building. Is it still there, the buildings?
Yep. But it's soon, I think it may be raised.
I loved going in there. Whoa, one word.
Yeah, so you lost a point on this one.
Delicious.
There we go.
Because we in that period of time, you could get a hamburger outside the home at Happy Humpty.
Mm-hmm.
The drive-in, which was called, I'll think of it before the end of the talk.
You talking snack time?
Snack time. And Neely's had a great grill. We had burgers in there. And
Don't forget the fries.
and the fries were so good. And Dairy Queen. You get a burger at Dairy Queen. Still can.
Yeah. And the last one.
One word, I'm sorry. Hans and Fritz. That really came out of the past. It didn't last long enough. I don't know why it didn't work. It should have worked. It should have sold a lot of hamburgers there. Go ahead.
Last one, we're going person.
Person.
Dan Griffin.
Leader. You want a story about that?
You get a point. Yep.
He was one of the people in the high school that really related well with students. When I was there, he was assistant principal and worked with student council. I got to work on projects with him. He coached me and befriended and was kind and a mentor. And just, in my opinion, the essence of educational leadership, the kind of adult person who works well with children, young adults, and has to do, probably, in his job as assistant principal, difficult, complicated things, but also good things.
Well, it's over.
Okay.
You won.
I won.
Yes.
I like winning in St. Mary's. A winning record is always good.
It is. We appreciate you participating in Rider Nation Station's Word Association. We've come to the end of our show. It is our hope at Rider Nation Station, the vodcast, to entertain, educate, enlighten, and elevate your perspective about St. Mary's, Ohio. We hope a story has been told that augments the development of relationships, old and new, to promote growth for all who do, did, and will call St. Mary's, Ohio home. Again, I want to thank Dr. Thomas Poetter for his time and dedication to improve humanity. Our next podcast is kind of a mystery. Stay tuned to see if St. Mary's, Ohio is able to solve it. I hope you think positively about our town, the town we did not inherit from our ancestors, but the town we borrowed from our grandchildren. Peace to you, my fellow St. Marians, past, present, and future, always and always.
Thanks for watching another edition of Rider Nation Station, brought to you by Advanced Manufacturing Solutions, Plus One Professionals Real Estate, Laura Yelton State Farm Insurance, Minster Bank, The Evening Leader, and JT's Brew and Grill. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. It's free.